and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, December 21st, 2012, end of the weekend. We're still here! Got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in the control room, twiddling the dials, managing the warp drives, and generally keeping us out of trouble here today at the end of the week. Pauhana Friday, thank goodness here, heading into the weekend. Probably going to be kind of a weird weekend. I know the traffic here on Oahu is going to be really messed up because the first family is, out here for their Christmas vacation. And that just tends to mess everything up around here. So obviously the big super news is we are all still here. The Mayans were wrong. We're all still here. Which is a problem because I maxed out my credit cards yesterday down at the shopping mall because I didn't think I was going to have to pay those things, Actually, the truth of the matter is, the world did end. You're all dead. This is hell. And for you Christian listeners, the rapture happened. You didn't make the cut here. Anyway, getting back to some more serious news. Over at whatreallyhappened.com, I posted a flashback to an article I wrote many years ago called Oh, Rapture. And it's simply a compendium of all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of predictions of the end of the world that have been offered by the practitioners of various contagious psychoses. And so the Mayans are hardly alone in having miscalled the end of the world this time. And, it's come and gone. And all the history and science, corporate media offerings, and I use those terms loosely, they're counting up all the ad revenues from the programs they had. And today they're running programs saying, well, the Mayans didn't really say that. And, it's just more of that same stuff that's going on here. Many, many years ago, when I got out of college, I briefly went to work for CBS Television City, and I got lured away from CBS Television City because I was way down in the basement, kind of really at the bottom of that whole thing. And I got lured away to be the technical director for a Christian television station. And someday I'm just going to write a book on all the crazy stuff that went on over there. But the station was in trouble because the station manager had gone to one of these tent revival meetings saying the world is going to end at exactly 6:42 p.m. on May 12th, blah, blah, blah. And the station manager had believed it and converted the TV station 24 hours a day. The world is going to end. The world is going to end. Didn't run commercials. Didn't run the paid programming, of which there's a lot floating around in the Christian TV communication industry. The day came and went. The Lord did not show up, and the station was left with all these bills. They had no money to pay, and was basically driven out of business. So it's not something that happens a long time ago. Yeah, it's still going on here. All right, moving on to some more serious matters. This is day 7 of Lanza Mania. All Lanza, all the time. Actually, they are starting to back off and fit some real news back into there. But they're still pounding this whole thing just constantly. And by golly, just to keep the mania going, there's a new shooting in Pennsylvania. 4 dead, 2 injured, including one of the officers. And apparently, the suspect was out on a rural road just shooting in random directions. And the cops showed up to confront him about that. And that's when the firefight started. So if this guy's just out on the road in the middle of nowhere just shooting in random directions, we're back to that question. What medications was he taking? Now, earlier today, the NRA had their press conference, which was heckled and disrupted by what I presume are hired public relations shills to go in there and scream about bloody children and everything. And the corporate media is making the agent provocateurs the focus rather than a lot of the common sense statements of the speakers. Although a lot of people are very alarmed that the NRA's solution to the problem is to have armed guards in every school in America. There's a whole new job market for you. And again, no mention of the well-documented link between SSRIs and violence. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Lanzamania and the continuing attempt by the corporate media to just convince us that guns are bad. We got to get rid of all guns, and then everything will work out okay. The economy will improve. Your hair will get curly. Your dandruff will go away. Your bad breath will be a lot better. Your potency will return if we just get rid of the guns. Now, Piers Morgan, as you're probably already aware, had a major meltdown in his recent interview with Larry Pratt, the president of Gun Owners of America. And not one to learn from his own mistakes, Piers Morgan decided to get Ted Nugent on for an interview. Because Ted Nugent, along with being a music star, he is a serious gun enthusiast. He's been on some of these gun reality shows. I forget which one he was on, whether it was either Sons of Guns or American Guns or whatever. And they're out there just having fun with their weapons. So Piers decided to get him on the show and see if he could go on the attack. And once again, Piers Morgan was embarrassed, was made to look foolish. Now, if guns are bad, which is the message we're getting from the corporate-owned media right now, if guns are bad, how come all of our top politicians, including his Obama-ness, are surrounded by heavily armed guards? Okay? How come you never see a mass shooting at a police station or a gun store? That tells you what the solution really is. Over in Switzerland, half the population are armed with full auto military combat rifles in the hands of nearly every adult male between the ages of 18 and 45. There's virtually no gun crime in Switzerland. Now, somebody actually wrote in and said, well, over in Japan, they ban guns. Nobody has guns, and there are no shooting deaths over there. Yeah, but look up Japan's statistics on murder by knives and swords. Americans are into the gun culture, obviously. Japan is big on swords. Their swords are legendary. They're out there. Everybody has them. They're very sharp. They're very strong, and there are a lot of murders committed with those. So the problem are people who are going to murder out of motive or pharmacological mistake. And the only solution really is to allow the law-abiding to be equally armed to the people who are suffering from these pharmaceutical drugs until they're willing to address the issue of the pharmaceutical drugs. More and more people are asking if the media's anti-gun blitz is failing, and certainly to judge from the surge in weapons sales, we'd have to say no. Now, Rasmussen ran a survey after the Sandy Hook shooting. They did a national survey conducted December 17th to 18. Only 27% of the respondents think stricter gun control laws will do the most to prevent these events. 48% believe more action in the mental health area is going to help. 15% put the emphasis on movies and video games, and the rest were basically undecided. Now, this poll came out during a barrage of hysteric gun-bashing propaganda, and the majority of the respondents still said we have to look at the mental health and mental medications these shooters are on. So the media's attempt to put the blame on the guns, to support the gun ban agenda, and to protect the profitability of these giant pharmaceutical companies who are pouring this dangerous medication into our society. And they even admit in their own official prescription guide, yeah, this stuff can really mess you up. That's the chance you take. We're going to roll the dice and pour this chemical into you, and we'll see what happens here. But you're not going to end mass violence by disarming the victims. You need to allow potential victims to carry weapons so that you can shift the odds in favor of the good guys. And remember, we're not talking about running gun battles in the street. We're talking about these crazies with a shotgun or a Sig Sauer or a Glock approaching a shopping mall and then realizing, there are probably a dozen people in there carrying a gun. Maybe I'll go shoot up a tree or a garbage dump or something instead until this medicine gets out of my brain. The idea of everybody carrying guns is not to encourage violence, but to discourage the violence. The Second Amendment talks about defense. Even getting away from the idea of opposing tyranny in government, we have a natural right recognized by the Second Amendment to preserve ourselves, our safety, and our security. And we need to cling to that, because the guns are not the problem, the medications are. Slightly over 10% of the population are on SSRIs. Over 90% of these perpetrators, these shooters in these mass mall and school shootings, are on these medications. There's a clear, demonstrable link. And behind that are all the people who are on antidepressants who commit suicide or who try to commit suicide. And a lot of people who realized they were in trouble on the medications and just threw them away. And nobody's kept stats on that. Earlier in the week, I put out a call for people who had had these bad experiences to send me some emails, and I got a lot of them. I'm going to be reading a few here in a little bit here. Now, a story has happened here that you're probably not going to hear anything about on the corporate-owned media. Over in Oklahoma, 12-year-old girl was at home alone, and she heard somebody trying to break into the house. And she shot the guy. Wounded him, didn't have to kill him, wounded him, just kept him on the floor until the cops finally showed up to take him away. That's the reason to have guns in the home. That's the reason to teach your kids how to shoot. Because the police are never there in time to thwart the crime. They show up after it's all over. When the bodies are dead, the women raped, the valuables looted, the damage is done, they'll show up. And they'll promise retribution or justice or revenge or whatever you want to call it. But the reality is that if you were to go out today and rob somebody, there's less than a 1 in 33 chance you're even going to be arrested. That's the reality of law enforcement in this country. Probably the statistic is worse now. That's an old statistic. And now the cops are all out trying to write speeding tickets because that's where the money is here. Now, there's another website you need to look at. We've been talking about SSRIstories.com all week long, but there's another one called RXISK. Let me go back here. RXISK.org. It's supposed to be the word risk with a lowercase x right after the R, like prescription, RX here. And the actual website is spelled RXISK.org. This is an independent website for researching and reporting prescription drug side effects, and they have a special section for violence. There are a lot of experts coming forward to say this is a problem. It's big pharmaceuticals' best kept secret about the violence that is caused by these medications, from mild domestic violence incidents. Nobody knows how many of those are aggravated or triggered by the abusing spouse being on these antidepressants, all the way up to, of course, mass murder. It's a major, major problem. There's a book out called Pharmageddon by Dr. David Healy, in which he says violence and criminal behavior caused by prescription drugs are medicine's best kept secret. I've talked to a lot of doctors in this last week, and they're saying, absolutely, we know there's a problem. It's been around there for a long time. I'm going to read you a couple of emails I got here on the subject. I've been a firefighter and paramedic in the Denver area for 17 years. For the last 10 years or so, it has been obvious there is a linkage between suicides and SSRI drugs. I began paying attention to the medication lists of people who kill themselves, try to kill themselves, or harm themselves, and it has been overwhelming, the percentage of people who are on these drugs. In fact, I cannot remember a single suicide in the last 10 years where the patient was not taking antidepressants. A revelation as to why came to me from a 14-year-old girl whom I repeatedly took to the hospital for cutting herself with razors. No, it was not a cry for help, she told me. It is because she takes these drugs which numb her emotionally. Then when bad things happen to her and she knew that she should be sad, mad, or upset, or more to the point that she wanted to feel sad, mad, or upset, she would cut herself to feel physical pain because she could not feel emotional pain. This, of course, would lead to more medications being prescribed, and the vicious cycle continued. It is my opinion that the reason these people hurt themselves and others is the fact they're no longer able to feel anger or happiness, and a life without joy is not worth living, and a life without sadness makes it impossible to deal with problems intellectually. Also, every suicide I went to this summer was a young veteran. two of which were women. All were on SSRI drugs. Another letter, real quick. I've never been on any of these myself, but one of my best friend's brothers was on Paxil. 8 years ago, I hired him to install oak flooring in my house. He was kind of on the skids and lived pretty far away, so I had him stay in my house while he did the work. He was no real problems here, but he was telling me how he wanted to get off the stuff. He told me it made him feel really weird, and he wanted to get off it. He told me that whenever he tried to cut the dose, he would feel electric shock-like pains all through his body. Later on, he found out that he needed to shave a little bit off the tablet with a razor blade before taking it, and scraping off a little more at certain intervals over several months. That was working, but he told me the stuff is quite expensive. The story is, the guy wound up killing himself. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And if I forgot to mention it at the top of the show, Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 to talk about whatever she's going to talk about here in this, our last program before the Christmas holiday. Just a reminder, the RBN will be doing repeat shows on Christmas Eve, Monday, and Christmas Day itself. We'll be back here live doing our normal stuff here on Wednesday. We're going to go to the phones. Thomas in Sweden. Aloha, Thomas. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Thomas.
Aloha, Michael. And to the, you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Okay, great. Aloha to you and to the listeners. Mike, I'm very glad that you read the email from the paramedic firefighter in Denver, especially about a 14-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an extra parent, and I have a lot of teenagers who come here. And one alternative that would increase the amount of fat in their diets, especially teenage girls who are so worried about their weight, because your brain is mostly fat to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, you get depressed if you don't have enough fat in your diet.
Well, I'm heading to McDonald's after this radio show then. No, I don't mean to make light of it, but we know that diet influences you. And very often, you know, we're encouraged to do things for the sake of fashion, which may not be the healthiest thing for ourselves. I mean, this idea of a rail-thin physique, you know, with huge muscles, that's something the media came up with. And if you look at photos of ordinary people throughout history, have healthy eating, and yes, you've got to have a certain amount of fat in your diet. You've got to have a certain amount of sugar because your brain is made mostly of fat, but it is fueled on sugar and oxygen. And people who are trying to reduce their sugar intake and load up on all these artificial sweetener chemicals is even worse. They're doing it for the sake of looking good and fitting into the social expectations that are manufactured by the people selling whatever it is they're selling to us, but it's not necessarily what is best for your mind and body.
If you can imagine a 14-year-old girl, you know, her body is changing and so forth. So she cuts down on butter and cuts down on everything because she wants to stay skinny. But then she doesn't feel filled up long enough, and then they live on munchies the whole day instead, which is only empty carbohydrates.
That's exactly right. You know, there's a weird thing that people who like to cook have noticed. If you eat fat by itself, it doesn't taste very good. And even eating sugar by itself doesn't taste good. It's when you blend them together that all of a sudden your body says, yeah, this is what I want, because that's your brain food.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, that's all I had. I don't know what you're doing, but I say Merry Christmas to you and to the listeners.
Well, thank you very much, and Merry Christmas back to you as well. And as long as we're on the subject of the Christmas holiday, and yes, I'm going to use the word, and I don't care if it's annoying our lords and masters over in Tel Aviv. Merry Christmas. Deal with it. I want to talk about something that happened 98 years ago during World War I. You've probably heard about it. The Christmas truce. We had the Germans and the British in the trenches just killing each other. Trench warfare almost seemed designed to kill the maximum number of people with the minimum loss of real estate. If you look at those parts of Europe through Google Earth, you can still see the remains of those trenches in a lot of places. And both sides agreed to a Christmas truce, and just somehow this one area, then the first side put up a sign saying Merry Christmas, and the other side put up a sign saying, Joyous Noel. Some of the soldiers just walked out of the trenches because it was a ceasefire, and they just went over and waved. And the others came up, and they shook hands, and they wound up having soccer games, sharing their food and beverage. They had a Christmas party. And when it was all over, they refused to go back to the war, because these were their friends now on the other side of that battlefield. And it wound up with the commanding officers getting court-martialed, and the soldiers were sent home in disgrace. How dare you not kill the people we tell you you're supposed to kill? And I want to read you a quote that I think is germane to this. Why, of course the people don't want war. Why should some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best he can get out of it is to come back to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. Hermann Goering at the Nuremberg trials. And he's absolutely right. We, the people of planet Earth, do not like war. We do not want war. We're tired of it. It is the money junkies and the sociopaths who see the world as a game board, and your sons and daughters as the playing pieces, as the chips to be thrown away recklessly for foreign policy. This Christmas time, let us please remember, peace on earth. We only get one. We'll be right back.